So if I summarize this, what I would say is that already there is a pressure on universities to reduce their research and development costs. And this pressure was further increased by the pandemic. Therefore, what the universities as strategists would have to do would have to find a way in which they would be able to reduce the research and development cost, but at the same time, they would be in a position to provide better products to their customers. And in order to find out the possibilities that we can have, it is advisable to look at the sources of R&D funds that can be available to us. For example, if we look at this R&D funds, the sources from which the universities were getting these funds, I'll go through. For example, the highest was the internal resources. That means the university would somehow develop a source to fund most of their product, because that is what they are doing presently. But after that, there was the federal government support. 32.9% of the funds were coming from the federal government. And next would be, for example, the state government. They are funding the universities. And if we look at another important source for funds for the universities, that would be the crowdfunding, which presently is only at 12.9%. So analysis of this graph would show us that in the countries, it is mostly the government, the federal government, and the state governments which are providing the funds for the universities. And as these institutions, the government itself was under pressure because of the pandemic, the funds that were coming to the universities have been reduced, and universities would have to look at the other sources. An important source for funds in the developed countries is the crowdfunding. Whereas the concept of crowdfunding in the developing countries is nearly not seen, as far as I have seen. And it is worthwhile to look at in this funding source and see how universities from the university platform can go on to this type of funding. Moving further, if we investigate and see how universities were able to get the inflow of the funds from the universities, from the other institutions, we see that the total from the knowledge exchange activities that was coming to the universities, 20% is from the large businesses. That is a huge number, 20%. And then the 33%, as we have already seen, was coming from public and other organizations. Again, that I would like to link that with my previous talk that we were talking. We were saying that the universities would have to rely more on research funding coming from the industry or from the government sector if they are able to connect with that, because in the developing countries, this is another major area, major reason of weakness, that universities are not able to get the funds from the government. That connectivity is very low in the most of the universities, as we see. And the total income again that was able to materialize was again from the large businesses and from the government sector. The purpose for my repeating this was to basically emphasize that in any organization, if we generally see, we see government, especially when we're talking about the developing countries, we see that the government is the major source of economic activity, and followed by large businesses. And that means that it is the government that have to take a lead in connecting with universities and to sort of develop processes in which the universities are able to connect with government on research and development projects. In the later slides, we will see how the developed countries have been able to develop this connectivity, whereas the developing countries, they have not been able to focus much on this side, this aspect of connectivity. And for that reason, the government, the flow of funds from government to the universities have reduced. Whereas when we are talking about large businesses, in the developing countries, we do not have that many established businesses. And therefore, I would not say that they have somehow been not been able to do what they should have been doing. The large businesses generally follow whatever the general their counterparts are doing in the other part of the world, and they focus on that. So let's see what we have for the future. And according to the survey by Higher Education on Research and Development, the recent survey, we again see that in the coming days, the computer and information technology, that would be spending about a positive change of 9.5% in that era. It is expected to grow in that. Therefore, this is a place where universities can decide to move in order to generate their resources. The second would be the research in social sciences. That is about 7.4%. And moving on, we see that the manufacturing and engineering, that change is going to be 45.8%, which is a major change. Therefore, again, what we would see is that manufacturing means industry, which is manufacturing products, new products for the community, for the general use, and that provides a place for the university to create a connectivity between the university and the industry. And then moving on, we have the, for example, mechanical engineering is going to give us a 6.0% increase. So these are the fields in which universities can go for the future development. So another thing that we have seen where the pressure was on universities, we have seen where the funds are coming from outside sector to the universities. So let's revisit and see where the universities are spending most of their money, most of their costs, expenditures. So if we look at the budget, again from a survey from a National Science Foundation, US, we see that the direct costs are contributing to 76.9%, which is the highest. Then comes the salaries, which is 43.8%. Then comes the indirect cost, 23.1%. Indirect costs are when universities give their projects to sublet their projects to other organizations, and that those organizations will have to be paid by the university. But again, these costs are again in the form of consultancies or knowledge exchange that we can say. So keeping these few slides in mind, the decision makers or the people who are responsible for making strategies of the universities will have to decide what they have to do in the future. They have to see what choices are available to them and what can they do to make maximum out of these choices. So the three choices that can be obtained from that could be that the cost leadership is an option. Basically not an option. That means if we go for reducing cost at the trade-off for other things, that means that the university would lose its brand image and its position in the market. Therefore, for the universities, it is not an option to go for a low cost. Second would be to maintain a large pool of the researchers, as we were talking